I think I finally got it. If you have seen my recent community post, then you know that this was supposed to be a first impression video for GAUSS. I said that because I feel that this frame was a bit off at first. I usually run endless survival missions to test how good a frame is. However, I can't seem to get a good grasp on how will I maintain kills per seconds in endurance runs while using GAUSS. Don't get me wrong, this frame can do survival missions, but the problem is, it takes a lot of work to make him viable at long survival runs. We all know how high enemy levels can scale at long endurance runs, and GAUSS, unlike other endgame frames, mostly rely on all of his abilities to survive. You need to be constantly using Macrush and the cold thermal Sunder to increase his battery and charge it to 100%, as at max Redline, you will get 100% damage reduction from your kinetic plating, and you can instantly freeze a target using your cold thermal Sunder. These are the strongest traits of GAUSS. He turns speed into extreme survivability and crowd control, making him perfect in high-level plays. Well, not quite. That's my problem. It takes a lot of effort in maintaining Redline at 100%. Most of the time, I will just focus on using my first ability, then killing enemies at survival missions, and you all know that is not good at long endurance runs, since we also need to maintain the kill ratio in this mission. The worst part is, kinetic plating does drain charges from my battery when I get hit, so probably, there's no way I can maintain a max Redline battery, especially if enemy levels scale beyond 100 plus. Well, it took me long enough to finally understand that the problem is my problem. I know you don't get it, so let me rephrase it. I am trying to maintain Redline at 100% charge always, which I obviously cannot. That's the thing about GAUSS. You don't actually need to maintain 100% charged Redline. His gameplay is hit and run, wherein you will constantly rely on your blinding speed and crowd control abilities to both survive and kill enemies in a blink of an eye. With this kind of mindset, I was able to understand this frame and his mechanics. So now, let me share to you an in-depth guide on GAUSS, beginning with all the details you need to know about his abilities. His first ability is what makes GAUSS special. One single press of a button, and you will be the fastest frame in the game. But unlike other speed abilities, Macrush doesn't scale with power strength. Instead, it scales well with efficiency, and having 175% max efficiency makes you cover a lot of ground per energy. Aside from efficiency, Macrush speed is somehow affected by sprint speed mods, such as the sprint speed aura, armor agility, speed drift, and rush. Even Arcane Phantasm will affect the effectiveness of this ability, and, as well as the Amalgam Serration mod in your primary weapon. On the other hand, power strength mods only increase the explosion damage when you crash into a solid object, while range mods increase both knockdown and explosion radius. Honestly, I don't find this ability good when it comes to dealing damage. Even though it deals some slash damage when paired with kinetic plating, still, it doesn't do much even if you equip your GAUSS with lots of power strength, since it's fixed damage, and not by percentage. I find Macrush more of a utility than a damage ability, as usually, you will be casting this ability to build up your electrokinetic battery. Speaking of your battery, there are two ways to charge up your battery while using Macrush. One is through holding down the ability to sustain it, and the other one is by tapping it to do a short Macrush. In my experience, short burst Macrush does allow you to charge your battery effectively, especially when you are in maps that have some tight spaces. However, in open areas, or open worlds like in the plains, running wild with Macrush is definitely a fun option. Now let's proceed to his second ability, Kinetic Plating. As opposed to players saying that this is his main source of survivability, I find it as a secondary tool to mitigate damage. His first source of survivability is movement. With blinding speed, you will be able to dodge almost all incoming damage. Kinetic Plating is just your second layer of defense, wherein it mitigates damage, depending on your battery level. But that's not all it can do. It will also allow you to restore lost energy, once an enemy hit you with any of the damage types, including slash, puncture, impact, heat, cold and blast. I have seen some complain that this ability doesn't restore energy, but, do remember, it only restores energy once you have been hit by these aforementioned elements. If you have been hit by toxin damage, then it won't restore energy. Now let's talk about its damage reduction. With no power strength, you will receive a minimum of 20% damage mitigation when your battery level is at 0, and 100% when it's at max level. Adding at least 246% power strength will cap the minimum damage reduction to 50%, and, adding adaptation, Prime Flow, Quick Thinking, Arcane Aegis, and Arcane Grace, will make your GAUSS super tanky. The only problem is, this setup will make all of his other abilities useless. Besides, having a setup like this is also costly, and honestly, your survivability won't last if you are face against level 150 plus enemies. Not to mention that getting hit by any of the damage types not mentioned in Kinetic Plating will not restore your energy. A duration-based, or even a balance build for GAUSS will be much more effective, since you will not only cast his other abilities, but you will also have a chance to get that 100% damage reduction coming from this ability. We will talk about that later on the build section of this guide, but for now, let's proceed to his third ability, Thermal Sunder. Thermal Sunder is an area of effect ability, wherein you can choose to cast either heat or cold. Tapping the ability button will vacuum all enemies in the radius, and proc cold status, while tapping it again will freeze those enemies caught in the radius. On the other hand, holding the ability key will push enemies, and then proc heat damage to them. This may not be known to many, but it seems that the heat damage does scale once you do another heat thermal sunder again to those enemies affected by this ability. Basically, cold is good for crowd control, while heat is good for semi-nuking star chart enemies. We will talk more about these later on the build section. For now, let's dive in deeper to this ability. So both heat and cold can be combined to do blast damage. Tapping the ability once, then holding it afterward will result to blast damage which somehow strips enemy armors. The armor stripping capability, however, is not clear, but I hope Digital Extremes will somehow tell us how much armor will the blast proc strips. The best part of this ability is the cold proc. Honestly, once your battery is beyond the red line, you can freeze enemies just by casting the ability once. Not to mention that it does help you charge up your battery. When you combine it with Macrush, not only that you will be charging your battery fast, but you will also freeze a bunch of enemies in a room swiftly, giving you enough time to deal damage. This is where GAUSS excels the most in my opinion, fast movement and crowd control. But to maintain his proficiency in this aspect, we must understand how to use his final ability, Redline. Take note of this, Redline affects all of GAUSS abilities. What it does are, it halves the energy cost of Macrush, it gives you 100% damage reduction on your Kinetic Plating, and it allows you to freeze targets with one single tap of Thermal Sunder. However, casting Redline doesn't mean that you will activate the battery of this frame, it simply means that you are overclocking his battery. Without this ability, you can use up to 80% of this frame's battery, but once you activate it, you will gain 20% more to reach that 100% max level. The percentage counter you see on your battery indicates the speed of increase on your battery level, and its decrease, when the battery level drops too low. When the Redline counter reaches 100%, battery drain from abilities will be completely negated. This is not only helpful for Thermal Sunder, but it's extremely beneficial for your Kinetic Plating, since enemy hits will not drain your battery at 100%, and the best part is, you will maintain that 100% damage reduction from this ability. But that's not all Redline can give this frame. It can also boost his reload speed, attack speed, holster speed, and fire rate. The amount of buff totally depends on your battery level, and it does scale well with duration mods, so obviously, the first stat that we must prioritize in creating a build for this frame should be duration. By the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, Kinetic Plating gives you immunity to knockdowns and staggers, allowing non-stop motion. However, the stagger coming from quick thinking will not be negated by Kinetic Plating. One last thing before we proceed to the build section of this guide. GAUSS passive allows you to gain bonus shield recharge rate, and shield recharge delay reduction, for every point of battery stored in his gauge, up to a maximum of 80% for both when the battery is full. So basically, it's a good thing to be always moving, and it's certainly best to equip shield mods over health. Okay, now let's proceed to builds. First stop is the speed build. The mod setup for this is plain and simple. Just put all the sprint speed mods on your build, along with 175% efficiency so that Macrush will cover huge distance per energy drain. Also, if you have it, you can add Arcane Phantasm for extra speed. Then, you can also add Amalgam Serration on your primary weapon to get more speed buff. And lastly, if you need more speed, then you can add Dispatch Overdrive in your melee weapon. You'll be running like Flash with this setup, and if you have someone like Volt, Wisp, and any other frame that can buff your speed, then expect that you'll be running upside down with your GAUSS. Just be warned, it's not advisable to do it, especially for those who have motion sickness. Okay, Now let's proceed to the semi-nuke build. The idea of a semi-nuke build is to have max efficiency and some power strength. This mod setup is perfect for missions wherein you are dealing with star chart level enemies, and you need to kill enemies as quick as possible. Say, for example, the defense mission in Sedna, Hydron. You can be the main DPS of the team, by simply using Macrush, and then killing enemies with your thermal Sunder. Although GAUSS will not be like other nuke frames, wherein you just sit in one corner and cast your nuking ability. But hell, it sure is fun rushing into a crowd of enemies, and surprising them with a spicy thermal Sunder. Now we are down to the final build, and it's more of a hybrid build, wherein you can just pick GAUSS, and enter a mission. My general purpose build is a balance build, wherein I decided to have max efficiency so I can make good use of my Macrush ability. Also, I did not settle for lots of duration, as putting narrow-minded in the build will make my thermal Sunder ineffective. Primed continuity and constitution will be enough for my playstyle, to keep my kinetic plating and redline active almost every time, and the freeze duration will be enough to crowd control a room, since I can freely move around with my Macrush. For those who are curious if I can maintain a 100% redline with this build, the answer is it depends on how you move. If you are constantly moving, and using your cold thermal Sunder, then yes, you can have a few seconds to make good use of a 100% charged electrokinetic battery. But that's it. Don't expect that you will get to activate 100% always, since there are various factors, like those enemies hindering you to achieve 100% battery. But like I've said earlier, our main goal for GAUSS is not to achieve 100% battery charge, but to continually move around, which helps charge the battery beyond 80%, which will help us use all of his other abilities efficiently. Adaptation and redirection are just personal preference, but let me explain first why I chose these mods. First is, adaptation pairs well with his kinetic plating, since the damage reduction affects both health and shields. If you are constantly moving, you can benefit from the damage reduction by a lot. For the redirection part, I did choose this mod since GAUSS has higher shield pool than health, and also, his passive does give you some bonus on your shields, so, I think it's a good choice to put shield over health first. Anyway, Kinetic Plating's energy restore feature does works also when enemies are hitting your shields, so yes, it's definitely a good choice. But if you are constantly moving, and can always keep your battery beyond 80%, then I suggest using quick thinking instead of adaptation. Remember, we are just putting these survivability mods to help out our second line of defense, which is kinetic plating. We don't need to be super tanky as we will be constantly moving, and dodging almost every enemy attacks, and we will also be controlling the field with the help of thermal Sunder. With the stretch mod in my build, I have 17 meters radius for this ability, which is enough to freeze a crowd of enemies. And of course, last but not the least, primed flow for a high pool of energy. GAUSS is really reliant on casting his abilities, so it's better that you have a lot of energy to cast all of your abilities frequently. The sprint speed mods are obviously for more speed in Macrush, but you can actually replace them with any aura or Exilus mod that you like. The choice is really up to you. So that's it. Remember that this video is meant to educate you on how GAUSS generally works. It specifically addresses the fact that you need to move frequently to generate enough charge for his battery. And also, this shows you that you don't need to get that 100% battery charge every time. As long as you are moving, you can get beyond 90% damage reduction from kinetic plating, and instant freeze from cold thermal Sunder. Achieving 100% charge on your electrokinetic battery is just a bonus, and it sure is rewarding achieving God mode even if it's just for a short period. But honestly, I would like to see a better GAUSS in the future. I'm kind of excited about his augments. I hope in the future, we can have something that can quickly charge his battery to 100%. Nonetheless, GAUSS is still a pretty fun frame to play, especially if you are into speedy frames. He is the definition of speed right now in this game, and I strongly suggest that you try him out for yourself. But before you leave this video, please do give it a like if you find it informative, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. Squad Leader signing off.